Hi, everybody. Welcome to Perfectly Frank. I'm Frank Dominic, and today I have a special guest with me. The leader of the Green Party of Ontario, Mike Schreiner, is with us. Mike, would you like to say hi?
Hey, Frank, it's a pleasure to join you tonight.
This is pretty exciting. I've spoken with a few politicians before. I've had Marit Stiles on, and I cooked dinner with Jagmeet Singh, or I had pasta with him. But this is the first time I've been interacting with somebody from the Green Party, and I'm really excited to kind of stretch out into different areas because I personally. And I've spoken about this before. I'm a big fan of PR. I'm a big fan of MMP, and I'm a big fan of making sure that people's voices are heard. So before we jump into the nitty gritty of the politics, I do want to ask you, just out of curiosity, is green your favorite color, or is that just a happenstance? Like, where do you feel on the color spectrum there?
Okay, I'm going to answer that question. Can I say one thing really quick before that? If
For
you
sure.
ever want to cook dinner with me some night, happy to come back on. I grew up on a farm and I ran a few food businesses in my life, and so I'm a good chef in the kitchen and would love to cook dinner and chat with you one night if you ever want to do that.
You know
And
what? I can
yes,
circle back to you in
green
the summer.
is, yeah, we'll do that for sure. And green is my favorite color. It's always been my favorite color, even before I was leader of the Ontario Green Party. I love green grass, green trees, green plants. It's my favorite color. My second favorite color, just to make sure it's clear that I'm not overly political here, is blue because I love the blue sky and
Fair
blue
enough. And
water.
that's a
So
farm
there
thing,
you
right? I
go.
guess I guess it's because you grew up in that farm environment. Is that why?
I think so. I mean, I grew up in nature, and it's so maybe it's from those early days. It's been with me since I was a kid.
See, it's funny because I kind of grew up like as like one of those emo suburban teens. So like a nice dark red is my favorite color, and I think it's just like I was always into that kind of grungier kind of scene, and so like the blacks and
Yep.
the reds were always kind of what I was surrounded by, and even to this day I still like those colors, even though I think I'm a bit more colorful than I was as a teenager. Like. So you did grow up on a farm. You mentioned that, but you the farm that you grew up on, was that in Ontario, or because you were born in the States, correct?
That's right. I grew up in rural western Kansas on a farm in kind of the middle of nowhere, and I moved to Ontario in 1995 for love. Fell in love with this great province and a great country, and now I have two kids. 25 and 19, so they've lived their whole lives here. Proud Canadian as we square off in hockey tonight and
Oh
square
boy.
off against Mr. Trump. But I will say that growing up on a farm was a great experience, and I think part of why I've become an environmentalist was just spending so much time in nature as a kid.
So like, here's the thing. So what I'm hearing is you grew up on a farm in Kansas. You wear glasses. Is your partner's name Lois?
Her name is Sandy.
Okay, so you're not hiding that you're Superman from us. Okay, just making sure, because yeah, it's the vibe.
Yep,
It's the vibe you give off. Um,
got the Superman vibe.
well, speaking of the vibe, one thing that I'm a big fan of the On Poly podcast. I'm a big
Yep.
fan of TVO, Pakin, and John Michael McGrath, and he made a comment one day about like how him and you kind of had the same vibes, like guys who were really into numbers and really into having the stats at your fingertips. Uh, have you always fancied yourself as somebody who is more analytical, or like you grew up on a farm, so that's typically not the type of vibe you get from like a books type person. But like, did you evolve into somebody who was more into the stats and into the policy side of things, or were you always like interested in that kind of aspect of life?
Always been interested in that. My dad was one of those guys who would he ran a small business and a farm. He'd work all day, and then about, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night, he'd sit down with a book and read till midnight. And my mom was a small town school teacher, very much into reading, and so I was one of these nerdy farm kids who, drove tractors and combines and fed cattle at a far too young of an age, and somehow enjoyed reading books and being engaged in politics. So I'm an interesting fellow in that regard.
Well, I think that's good too, right? Like it shows you have like a very like lived experience, and I think too many times like it's very easy to fall into the traps and think about things in the binaries, like oh, like people would look at you. I think the type of person they would see you as is, oh, this guy probably grew up in Toronto and he probably had like academic parents and blah blah blah. But I think it's important for people to know that like not just you, but other people from different walks of life can experience different things. We're not the stereotypes that we are, um, and especially seeing that in politics. Now, you were the first ever Green Party member of Ontario to be in the House. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So it took me 9 years. I became leader of the party in 2009. And I started a couple businesses and some nonprofit organizations before I went into politics. So I brought my entrepreneurial spirit to politics. It took 9 years, which was a lot of hard work. And a lot of people said you would never elect a Green in Ontario. And now we have two, and hopefully we're going to have more soon.
Well, I have friends out in Guelph, and they're not. Some of them are politically active, some of them aren't. But like a lot of them say the same thing. They're like, "Oh, I've been a lifelong liberal or a lifelong NDP." But then they all have like this like little glint in their eye, and they're like, "But I have the chance to vote for the Green Party and actually have that person be elected." And I think that that speaks to something in a lot of us where maybe not 30-40% of the population would want to vote for the Green Party, but I think that there is a sizable chunk of the population who would love to have the opportunity to not throw away their vote. And I hate to, I don't like to put down parties like that. But with Ford winning 90 seats potentially with only 40% of the vote, it's something that kind of is on my mind. But are you excited by the prospect of Matt Richter potentially winning that third seat for you guys? Because like he seems like a solid dude. He was so close last time, and I think that Graydon Smith is the exact type of person we want to see leaving and be replaced by somebody who actually cares about the environment from the area that they are coming is so important for Ontario. Like it's just it's frustrating. Like how do you
Yeah.
feel about that? Because I can't even express it.
Yeah, Matt came so close to winning last time. And I'm thinking, my gosh, Perry Salvaskoka, if there was ever a place that people wanted to protect this beautiful place, it's Perry Salvaskoka. And I think that's why Matt does such a good job and why he came so close, why people like him so much, why he's so committed. I think we have a real opportunity there. But Frank, you hit a point that I think is so important. We do a lot of polling, of course, to figure out like, how would somebody vote green or why would they vote green or how can we maybe convince them to vote green? And I would say like 50% of the people we poll are like, we love the Green Party. We love your vision. We love your values. We love the fact that you're more collaborative when it comes to politics. We love your policy priorities, but we're not voting for you because we don't think you can win. And I keep thinking like, oh my gosh, if all these people would just vote for us,
If
we'd
everybody
form
changed their
government.
mind, progress could happen. Yeah, and I think that's the problem with the binary system. Like you see over in Europe, there are green parties all over Europe that
Oh, big time.
a few of them end up actually winning the vote. Some of them end up having the most amount of seats, but for the most part, you end up seeing green parties being the power brokers. Typically siding with the centrist and leftist governments. You don't
Yep.
too often get a right wing green party, although they do exist. Um, but it seems to me that in Europe, the value of the green parties is that they ensure that the governments who are in power don't leave behind the aspects of sustainability that are important, not just for like, oh, like let's have clean air and a healthy environment, but like we need our actual society to sustain and to survive. And I teach this to my business students. Like sustainability is so important. That's why companies that don't focus on sustainability, it's not about like, oh wow, they're not going to make as much money, or I'm not going to like them, and so I'm not going to buy from them. That's nothing to do with it. It's if the world goes down, the companies go down with them. If the world goes down, the government goes down with them. And I think that there is this inherent value when it comes to the environment that if we are not keeping it top of mind, we are literally going to lose everything. And I don't want my kids to like. And it's a joke. I know it's a joke. I'm going to say it, but it still feels wrong to say it out loud. But I don't want my kids to like die in the climate wars. Like it's a common
Yeah.
millennial joke that people make, but like it's one of those jokes where like there's a little bit of truth in there. And
Yeah.
and so one thing that I wanted to ask you about is somebody who is fixated on the environment and has this sustainability forward mindset. Are you concerned about the future that we're heading in, not just in Canada but globally? Like, how do you feel about that? Like, you don't have young kids, but you still do have kids that have a long life ahead of them. So, how do you kind of square that circle? Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, my daughters are 25 and 19, so they still have a lot of life to live. And I don't know, I read dystopian climate novels, probably far too many of them. And one of them I read had this harrowing scene of LA burning and a dad rescuing his daughter from the Inferno in LA. It's like a very harrowing scene, and it's set in like 2045 or something. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we just watched it happen in 2025. Like it's truly frightening. And I don't want to be a doomer. I'm a very hopeful, optimistic person, but man, we have a long way to go if we're going to address the climate crisis. And I think now we have the technology that allows us to do it and save people money at the same time. So I get
Well,
so
solar
frustrated.
is by far the cheapest type of electricity, correct? Like,
Oh yeah, wind and solar. That's why like $600 billion were invested in wind and solar last year alone because they're the cheapest sources of electricity. A heat pump will save you 13% on your heating and cooling bills. I got my heat pump running right now, and it's been running all
I
winter
looked
in
into getting a
minus
heat pump.
25-degree weather. Like it works, you know.
So that's the thing. I looked into getting a heat pump, but the way that my house was built, and because of how I have a finished basement, the guy was
Yep.
like, "Yeah, it's going to cost you more in the actual like drywalling and construction, getting the extra pipe that you need like fitted. Like, there's just something about the way that my basement was apparently set
Interesting.
up because I needed an exhaust and an intake, and I only have the one. And if I was to switch over and do something, the way the guy was explaining to me, I'm not sure. So maybe I have to find another contractor. But
Hey Frank, I
um,
think you should get a second opinion on that.
I think that might be something, but the reason that comes to mind is because there are a lot of things when it comes to building where if we just built the houses with these things in mind, if houses came with heat pumps,
Oh,
if they came with solar panels, if they came with EV plugs, like why do we not have just put the thing in the wall? Like it saves so much money. Which one
totally.
of those things, whether it's heat pumps, whether it's solar panels, whether it's EV chargers in homes, is there a single type of policy like that when it comes to home building that you think would create more sustainable housing that is the first priority of a Green Party if you guys were to take office?
Well, the first priority is the heat pump because it saves you money, and it's just a no brainer, and that's why I'm so infuriated. The Ford government last year at this time they brought in legislation that took the unprecedented step of overturning an independent Ontario Energy Board decision that said, "Hey, let's stop subsidizing fossil gas hookups because heat pumps are cheaper for people." And Ford said, "No, no,
We
no."
got to give money to Enbridge, right? Like,
Well, yeah, they're $19 million CEO. Like, how's they going to get paid if we don't keep subsidizing him? Like, it's just so infuriating. So to me, that's the easiest one. We already have, and it's not like the OEB's. The OEB's been pro fossil fuel throughout most of its history. So for it to say, hey, like, why should we keep subsidizing Enbridge when we can help people save money? So to me, that's the easiest one. Somebody who drives an electric vehicle, your bigger savings comes from driving an electric vehicle, though. So if you have a heat pump and an electric vehicle, most people on average will save between $500 and $777 a month.
well,
Most of
I
that
have
comes
a
from
hybrid, and it only has a
yeah,
50-kilometer range. And outside of the winter, because like the winter range, it
yep,
does trickle down a bit. But outside of that, I can on in the spring, in the summer, and in the fall on my 50-kilometer range, drop my kid off at daycare, get to work, get back home, maybe even pick up groceries, and I don't turn my gas on. When I first bought the car,
yeah,
I bought it in August, and I didn't fill up my gas for the first time until after Halloween, which is crazy to think about.
yeah. Think about that. Think about that. So I have a Chevy Bolt. It costs less than $40,000, brand new. I can drive it from Guelph into Toronto to go to Queens Park. Drive around, and I'm at Queens Park like Monday to Thursday. So drive around Toronto and drive back to Guelph and never charge it.
That's
Like
yeah.
I'm
Like
just like,
people are worried about range anxiety, but like for the most part, modern EVs can get you at the very least 400 kilometers, if not more. And
yep,
in reality, when are you driving more than 400 kilometers straight without stopping for gas anyway? Which you could then stop
yeah,
at a DC charger and then plug your car in and get a meal and head out.
exactly. And I'm blown away right now. We're renting a Chevy Equinox EV for the campaign to drive me around Ontario. It is heated with a heat pump. So even in these like minus 25-degree days we're having, it still gets 500-kilometer range.
The
Like
car
I've
has a
never seen an EV like this. Like my
the car has a
Bolt,
heat pump in it.
the car has a heat pump in it. So it doesn't so the heat doesn't affect the range of the vehicle. So my Bolt, I'll have to admit, like it'll do 500 kilometers in the spring and fall, but about 300 in the winter. So it definitely doesn't go as far in the winter. But this Chevy Equinox still does 500 clicks in the winter. It's unbelievable.
And that's the thing. Like we talk about like the future of technology, and like it's not just EVs. Like one of the unfortunately one of the technologies that people seem to be fixated on right now is carbon capture. And the reason I say
Yep.
unfortunately is because I want to believe that we can potentially get to a future where carbon capture is undoing the damage of climate change. But it doesn't seem like right now the energy input is worth the carbon
Oh,
reduction.
not even close. Oh yeah,
So yeah.
the billions that have been spent on carbon capture and storage has netted like negligible carbon reduction. And
But the
so
thing is,
it's
I see.
really being,
Yeah.
pardon?
So, no, no, go, go, go.
Oh, and I say so it's really being used as an excuse to keep ramping up gas plants and fossil fuel use. And so I'm with you. Like if we can decarbonize and get to like a net zero world, which we have all the technology to do that in a way that's affordable for people, and then we figure out a way to do carbon capture and storage just to help get rid of carbon that's been in the atmosphere for the decades, I'm okay with that. But I'm not okay with using it as an excuse to keep spewing carbon pollution into the atmosphere because so far it's shown completely ineffective at actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere.
Well, I look at carbon capture the same way that I look at nuclear fusion, in so much that it is this far away off technology that everyone keeps saying it's 20 years, we're around the corner, it's around the corner, and we keep putting billions into it. But I do believe that we will get there. I don't know if it's going to be in my lifetime. I hope that it will be, but the potential of that future where we do have unlimited clean energy, where we do have the ability to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. That is so enticing. And I think that when you say it as a simple thing to people, like, oh yeah, like eventually we'll be able to do this. So we just have to like work on these technologies, and then like don't worry, like we'll stop using oil when we get there. It as much as I want to believe in those technologies, I understand how easy it is to sell people on that. And that then prevents us from getting to the goals that we need. So, outside of that type of technology, is there any up and coming technology that we haven't seen fully implemented in Ontario or elsewhere that you think is really going to help drive, whether it's sustainability or otherwise help to really help us in terms of the environment in the future?
I think one that we're starting to explore is green hydrogen. Ontario is well positioned, partly because one of the best places to store green hydrogen is in salt caves. We have salt caves near Kincardine, and we also have the Bruce Power hydro line that is in that area. So there's some huge opportunities there, and also with ammonia, and so we could be looking at ammonia and hydrogen as being emission free fuel, especially for long distance transport. Because EVs are great for like us driving around Ontario in our car or SUV, whatever. But when you think of an 18 wheeler long distance transport, EV is not going to work for that because the batteries would just be so huge. And so we have opportunities with hydrogen fuel cell or ammonia fuel cell vehicles to be able to decarbonize long distance transport as well, which I think is pretty exciting. And we still have a ways to go, but we're getting there in terms of that technology being available. But what I find frustrating is we already have so much of the technology to be able to significantly decarbonize and do it in a way that saves people money. Like
Wind and
this is what
solar
I find
alone
so
in tidal
frustrating.
could take care of so much. Like between hydro, tidal, wind, and solar, like and geothermal too, like it's really taken
Yep.
off. Like they're finding ways to make it more efficient now. Um, One thing I wanted to ask you, I don't know how in the weeds you are on the science of it, but you mentioned green hydrogen and ammonia. Is there any concern about like how like water vapor is technically a greenhouse gas? Is there any concern with the nitrogen and then water vapor output that would be a result of the reactions in the fuel cell and the of hydrogen and ammonium based cars? Like, is that a concern at all, or is that just because my biggest concern is
Yep.
that we use a new technology and then we've created a new problem for ourselves. Now there's more water in the atmosphere, so our rains are
Yeah.
heavier or whatever. You know what I mean?
It's a good question. I'll leave that one up to the scientists. I don't have enough scientific information on that. I can tell you, car makers like Toyota, for example, have bet big time on hydrogen. And so I've had some fantastic meetings with them because I've been like, "Whoa, you guys were like the leaders in like the Prius, just an amazing car. Like, how come you didn't bet more on electric vehicles? Because other manufacturers have surpassed them. And they've said, you know what, we've put a big bet on hydrogen because we think hydrogen fuel cells are going to be um, a technology that's going to really proliferate. Um, and I'll have to ask them this question for you.
Well, then the other concern too, like as I was saying, I don't want to replace one issue with another. Green hydrogen, fantastic, and I know that I think maybe I'm getting my colors wrong, but I think gray and potentially blue are also okay. But
Well,
yeah, well, so that's the thing. So my main concern is that the type of hydrogen that I think many centrist and right wing governments in Canada, the U.S., and abroad would be interested in is the type of hydrogen that can be fracked while we're already getting natural gas and
yeah,
oil.
exactly. That's
So
why I say
my
green
concern,
hydrogen.
yeah, and so my concern is though we push forward for a hydrogen style future, and then we end up with more greenhouse gas emissions. And I know that there's nothing that like because you're obviously pushing for green hydrogen, and that's the ideal future. Are you ever concerned that whether it's when we're talking about green hydrogen or even when we're talking about proportional representation and electoral reform, are you ever concerned that when there's a good idea and we're so close to the finish line that nefarious actors essentially bastardize the thing that we're aiming for and end up making the situation worse than before?
Well, I think you always have to worry about that. I mean, there's a lot of life is like that. But one of the arguments people have always used against proportional representation was, well, you progressive parties want it, but what if we elect these right wingers and, we have like a right wing fascist government that forms? And I've always said, you know what? I would much rather have a few seats in a legislature that represents that viewpoint. And especially if that's the democratic will of the public. Um, but what I find far more dangerous is when those elements take over a mainstream party, kind of like what we're seeing south of the border right now, and then have the kind of power they have. So I would much rather have that power distributed, in a legislature where you're hearing all voices, even voices I fundamentally disagree with, because we want that reflected in democracy. And I think what I find far more dangerous is to have a mainstream party taken over by those forces and then having the kind of power that you're seeing the Trump administration bring a wrecking ball to government in the U.S. And now, the trade wars that it looks like we're going to have to be dealing with here in Canada and around the world.
Well, I mean, like you were pointing out, like yeah, like it's better to give them that small piece of representation rather than let them take over the party. I mean, Jason Kenney himself, as he was booted out of the UCP, basically said the lunatics are running the asylum. So we're seeing firsthand, even the conservatives like oh no, the leopard ate your face. I'm so shocked. Um, but on top of that, the concern that I see is yeah, people who can't bring themselves to vote for a left or a center party because they view themselves as a conservative will inevitably back the party that has put the whether you want to say lunatic or otherwise inherently potentially dangerous rhetorically style person. I'm trying to be kind of dance around it carefully, but I, as much as I'm not a fan of Ford, I'm not as concerned about him in that regard as I am with Danielle Smith and I am with Pierre Poilievre. But Ford himself is the kind of guy to say one thing and uh, do another. Like he at debate when he was like, "Oh, I was for the green belt, then I wasn't against the green belt, then I was for the green belt, then I was against the green belt." What even was that? So when you look at Doug Ford and he doesn't necessarily to the public appear to be as worrisome as some of the other conservative leaders across the country. What do you see as the potential worst case scenario from another Ford government?
Yeah, I think so. One is the housing crisis, I think, is only going to get worse. And because Ford is focused on how do I unlock profits for wealthy land speculators, he prioritizes that over how do I unlock homes that people can afford. And we saw that with the $8.3 billion Greenbelt scandal. But it's not just with the Greenbelt scandal, it's the enforced urban boundary expansions onto municipalities, which is going to enforce low density sprawl on them, which is the infrastructure associated with that.
I think
I see the
Hamilton was
fact
affected by that a lot, right? I think was that one of the cities?
Hamilton was
Yeah.
fought back against it, and I give Hamilton a lot of credit. But it's not just Hamilton; he posted on Hamilton and posted on Waterloo region, imposed it on even small communities like in Wellington County, right outside of Guelph. All across the province, he was opposing boundary expansions, which were really designed to, benefit land speculators who had bought land in and around those areas, especially when we have all kinds of professional planners who have said, we already have enough land approved for development to build 2 million homes. So, like, why don't we just build them on the land that's already approved for development?
And I think I grew up in a very like NIMBY style area. Like I grew up in the suburbs, right? And I remember always hearing people say like, "Oh, well, why would you want two families living in this house over here?" And I think there's this negative connotation. The thing that always kind of blows my mind is that I grew up in a very Italian area. My parents, my whole family, everybody in my school was Italian, and like my uncle grew up living literally in a closet because he lived with multiple family members and his grandparents and cousins. And so there weren't enough people in their bedroom. So like just 50, 60 years ago, Italians were in the place where we were the ones who had multiple families to a house. And so I try to have that lived experience that my family went through, and I try to keep that in mind. And so when I look at what we can do, for example, putting fourplexes across the entire country, or at least the province, I look on my street and I think, if somebody knocked down one of these houses and put up a fourplex, it really wouldn't change my life that much. Half the people on my
No, no.
street already have 3 or 4 cars. What difference is it going to make if there's one car per unit? Is fourplexes, because I kind of feel like that's a really valuable tool that we should be implementing. Do you see that as being like one of the best things that we can do in terms of housing, or is there other stuff in terms of housing policy that you think it has a more immediate and tangible effect on supply?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring a few things together. So I think legalizing fourplexes and four-story as of right absolutely has to be done. I would argue, and we have this in our platform, is legalizing sixplexes in cities over 500,000. Because what I'm hearing from a lot of builders is that in places like Toronto, with the land value so high, it's hard to make fourplexes even financially viable. They almost need to do five or sixplex. Um, Combined with that, though, is I think we need to have incentives for people to develop starter homes. And so one of the things we've advocated for is removing the land transfer tax and development charges on homes under 2,000 square feet built within existing urban boundaries. So one, legalizing things like fourplex, but two, then creating the financial incentives to make it pencil out better, and also to just help first-time home buyers, have homes that they can afford. I mean, $150,000 is about what you could save up to that. That's what my entire first house cost. My kids can't even buy a house with a down payment with $150,000 right now. So we've got to not only increase supply, but figure out ways to lower the cost of that supply. And then obviously, the province is going to have to step in and replace the development charge revenue that municipalities are going to lose. So they have the money to be able to put the infrastructure in, sewer, water, streets, etc. But if we're building it within existing urban boundaries, a lot of that infrastructure is already built. So it is the fastest way to quickly increase housing supply in a way that's affordable for individuals as well as for municipalities. I think we also have to do other things like legalize 6 to 11 story buildings in large urban centers along major transit and transportation corridors so we can have multi residential, multi unit buildings. We have to come up with innovative ownership structures. So, for example, there's something called stratification of title. That happens in British Columbia, but it's not legal here in Ontario. That would allow you to do a fourplex, and then each person or family could own their own fourplex and then sell that for their portion of the fourplex. So having some innovative ownership models like that, I think is critically important. All that being said, though, we will still have a housing affordability crisis if government doesn't get back into providing government assisted, deeply affordable nonprofit co op and supportive housing. 93% of the deeply affordable homes in Ontario were built before 1995. That's when government stopped supporting that kind of housing. So we've had 30 years now of not building deeply affordable homes in Ontario. And that's partly what's contributing to the fact that we have 81,000 people experiencing homelessness in our province.
Yeah, I'm basically my entire life, the government hasn't been involved in housing, and so now we have a whole generation of millennials who don't remember what it's like to have the government actually provide and create housing, but we're the only province, as far as I'm aware, that doesn't have a housing organization that is responsible for building housing. Uh, so I think one of the main hurdles is getting people to understand that this isn't like a left right thing. This is an up
Yeah.
down thing. We have to create a province in which it's actually affordable for people to live in. And you mentioned the homelessness crisis. I've been doing a lot of reading into that, and one of the accounts on TikTok that actually came by recently, and my wife is obsessed with this guy. He goes by Tiny Tiny Homes. Have you seen his page?
No, but it sounds like a page I would like.
So he's in a bit of a beef right now with the city of Toronto because he was
Oh,
trying to
I've
set
read
up.
about him.
Yeah,
Yes.
but he was trying to set up these really, and it's so cool. So he put solar panels on top, right? He has a little bed. They have like a little toilet that he has a pump that you can use with water, and the solar panels power everything, so you can like charge your phone, and this gives people a place like a home base, and it's tiny, right? It's like one of those shoebox apartments you see in Japan or China, right? But it gives people a temporary place to get themselves back up off the ground. And even if we were to get involved in building, whether it was tiny homes that are portable or tiny homes that were more like trailers that could be moved to an area that need them, I think that there really is a desire and a drive to see housing be solved. And not everybody needs a massive home. Some people just need a home base with a roof over their head, a place to charge their phone so they can bring it to work. Because unfortunately, phones are now necessary. And if you don't have a place to live, if you don't have a place to answer your emails, how are you supposed to get a job? So that's
Exactly.
something that's really been top of mind for me. Um, so once again, the reason I bring this up is he had that little bit of a spat with the city of Toronto. Um, Ford wants to have more control over cities. Meanwhile, I've talked to some people in the city of Toronto, and they think that larger cities need their own charters that keep them separate from the province. I'm kind of iffy on it. Where do you fall on the spectrum of we need to let municipalities do what they know best, while at the same time we need the government to the provincial government to guide us to ensure that we are enabling fourplexes and we're allowing for these tiny homes. Like, where do you fall on that level of control, that spectrum?
Yeah. So I think on certain things like zoning regulations and planning of critical infrastructure and housing, I think the province needs to take a bigger role because what one municipality does, which may work for them, directly affects another municipality. And so there's got to be some integration there. I think the province can play an important role there. That being said, I do think the premier has interfered far too much in municipal jurisdiction when it comes to things like size of municipal councils, whether they can put bike lanes in or not, those types of things, like interfering with democracy, whether it's the size of a council or strong mayor powers, imposing urban boundary expansions onto municipalities, downloading costs onto them. I think the premier's um, really created a lot of problems for the province by doing things like that. And then the one area where him using his power would actually make a huge difference by legalizing fourplexes. He's like, oh no, no, can't do that, can't do
Oh,
that.
that's an infringement of municipality
Yeah,
rights.
yeah. So to me, it's just another example of how the premier's agenda is driven more by um, expanding low density sprawl. So the land speculators who have purchased that land can cash in billions of dollars, and the rest of us are left holding the bag and paying the bill.
It's it's a rough thing to think about. So part of me kind of wants to move a bit away from all the
Okay.
Ford talk. So what I do want to ask you though, is you earlier mentioned that you were a cook and that you really enjoyed cooking. What is your favorite dish to surprise people with? Not your favorite dish to cook for yourself, but like if somebody was coming over for dinner and you were like, I want to treat this person to something special. What's that thing that you're gonna make?
Yeah, so it depends on the time of year. So this time of year, I'd probably do one of my homemade pizzas. I got a
Oh,
pizza stone in the oven.
okay.
I'll make up the dough myself, use all Ontario ingredients, and just make you up a really nice homemade stone based pizza. If it's in the summer, I'm a grilling kind of guy. I love to grill, and I have a pelletized wood grill, so electric motor with pelletized wood pellets, so very environmentally friendly grill. but more importantly, oh my gosh, the flavors. And whether it's if you're a vegetarian, I can do amazing grilled veggies. If you're not, I do a mean barbecue chicken. So happy to base it on the seasonality of not only the food itself, but the type of cooking methods. I don't think I want to be pulling the grill out tonight because I'd have to shovel the snow off of it.
I know people who love grilling in the winter, and I'm like, listen, you do you, but you are never see like right now. I have like 2 feet of snow, if not more, in my backyard. My kid was playing in it, and she decided that she wanted to go into the backyard and play in the grass, and I'm like, there's no grass out there right now. And she couldn't like get back up the stairs, and I was looking at her through the window, and I'm like, kid, I don't have snow pants right now. I just ordered a pair, and my boots are broken. I have to go buy a new pair. If you can't make it up the stairs, you're trapped out there. And so I think about my friends who are like grilling in the winter, and I'm like, dude, I wouldn't even go out there to help my kid up the stairs. I'm not going out there to grill you chicken right now. But when you talk
100%.
about when you talk about pizza though, I gotta pry a bit here. Pineapple, where you fall there?
Oh, I don't do pineapple on pizza.
Good.
Sorry.
No, no,
Sorry. I mean, you're
I'm very
Italian.
on
Come
board with
on.
that.
You're a good Italian. You can't like put pineapple on your pizza.
But
Come
like
on.
technically, pineapple and pizza is Canadian, so that pulls on my heartstrings. Although no, I can't. I've eaten some weird combinations of pizza, but pineapple's never in there. Have you ever been to Italy?
No, it's one place. So I've been to Italy once. I'll take that back. Only northern Italy. Only just for I was in Torino for a few days for work. But I've never traveled like down into southern Italy, and I've always wanted to. So I got to go back sometime.
So one of the interesting things about pizza in Italy, and I don't know if this is a more modern thing or if this is how it's always been, and because we're just used to Western style pizza or North American style pizza, we don't think about it. But every place that you go to, once you kind of go south of Rome, the pizza starts to get a little different. So I remember going to places along the coast where, like, of course, fish, but like there would be like corn based pizzas where like corn was like the
Hmm.
main topping and there was some other veggies
Yep.
underneath. That was like super nice. But when I was in Sicily, one of the things that's really popular there is, and it, for some people, this sounds really gross, but like this is actually one of the best pizzas I've ever had. I don't know what the other toppings were, but the two main toppings were tonno, so tuna, like fresh tuna right
Hmm.
from the sea, and red onion on a
Ooh, that
pizza,
sounds
which
delicious.
right, but like it's not your traditional style of pizza.
No, not at
But,
all.
but there was a lot of things like that, and like you get like if once you start getting to the Italian pizzas, you get like the artichoke and this and that, and I'm very down for like both the crazy Italian toppings of style of pizza, but then like also like the classic like Western like bacon cheeseburger style pizza where I'm just getting like multiple layers of ground beef and bacon bits and multiple layers of cheese or all that kind of stuff. Um, is there any type of like whether it's pizza or something else? Is there any like food flavor where someone else might look at you and be like, "Is that really what you like?" But you're like, "No, no, this is it. Like this is the thing I like."
Yeah, that's a good question. Wow. I don't know. I
Like,
don't know if I'm that
have your
wild
kids
of
ever
an
watched you eat
eater in
something
that
and they were like
regard.
grossed out by it?
I haven't done many two things that people have been grossed out by. Oh, my wife used to tease me all the time because I used to love to melt peanut butter in the microwave
Okay, no, that's
and
amazing.
then
No, 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 that's
mix
amazing.
and and then mix chocolate ice cream into it. So
That-
she used
that-
to
that-
tease me about this all the time.
no, that
I
sounds
think it's
amazing.
delicious, personally.
Melted peanut butter, you dip pretzels in it. I do sometimes I'll do
Oh,
a little bit of melted peanut butter and mash a banana and I make it into a
yep.
little thing, put that on
Okay.
bread. Like, no, no, I'm
Okay.
I'm all for it.
Okay. Okay, so you don't think I'm weird. My
No,
wife
no.
for years told me I was so weird for like melting peanut butter and mixing with my ice cream.
I'll tell you the weirdest thing I ever ate, and this is not something that I would want to eat again. When I had gone to Poland, um, we were in like a restaurant in the square, and it was like a very traditional style restaurant. And I was like, you know what? I asked the guy, I'm like, give me like what is the most classic like local style food? Like I want to know like what is a traditional food here in the square? And he said pig hoof, and I said okay. And I couldn't read Polish, so I couldn't see on the menu what type how it was cooked. I thought it was going to be like fried, and it was just like broiled. And there was like no flavoring on it. It was just like and when he brought it, it was just like a pig's foot on the plate
Oh wow.
and the ankle and the leg. And I tried eating it, and I got maybe one or two bites in, and I'm like, nope, I am eating human flesh. This is not great.
Not gonna happen.
I'll eat anything. That was not one of the anythings.
Well, I have been to a few Robbie Burns dinners over the years, and had my bites of haggis, which I'll do it for the tradition, but it isn't something I'd want to eat regularly. That's for sure.
That's still something I got to try out. Haggis is on my list of things that you got to try at least once. I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier. We had mentioned a couple times about like green technologies and how things can be abused, and you were mentioning that you're into like that uh, apocalyptic style fiction. You're mainly a book guy, or do you like video games and TV as well?
I'll do TV and I'll do video games, but I'm kind of boring when it comes to video games. I'm more into like playing Catan on my iPad or playing cards on my phone than I am hardcore video gamer. But I used to be pretty good at Mario Kart. My kids will attest to that. So I do have some gaming in me.
I want to tell you a little bit of a story from a game that is probably one of my favorite franchises. And I want to kind of tell you it takes place like 1,000 years in the future, but I want to tell you what led up to that. Now I want you to just reflect on maybe any parallels you might see. So basically,
Okay.
it's about roughly 2060, and pollution, climate change, out of control. Things are getting bad. And this amazing programmer or computer scientist, she comes up with this type of nano robot that essentially goes out and can create structures that can essentially heal the environment, whether it's decarbonizing, whether it's removing pollutants from the water. And these are self-replicating nanorobots that are able to fuel themselves and go off and fix whatever needs to be fixed. Well, it turns out that the company that she worked for, her CEO, not a great guy, and he decided to take this company and turn it into a weapons manufacturer. So after the environment got cleaned and everything got better, now there were these self-replicating robots that could go out and fight on behalf of militaries. And it turns out that what caused the apocalypse in this game is that these self-replicating robots, a glitch or an error in the code occurred, and they couldn't shut them off. Think about like Skynet Terminator style, right? And they would consume biomass to replicate. And once they ran out of the traditional style of biomass they were programmed for, they started to eat trees, and then they started to eat cattle and humans, and convert their bioenergy into the materials they needed to reproduce. And eventually, that led to the downfall of humanity. Um, is there any political parallels that you might see in that story to our modern day?
Wow, you seem to be bringing up the AI apocalypse here.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, no,
The
it's frightening to think about how many folks in the AI space have said, "Hey, we got to regulate this," and then how many folks are, like an Elon Musk kind of guy who's like, "No, I think us, the corporate overlord should control it, not government or the people."
so and that's one of the things that kind of I'm at odds with, because like I I want to believe in free markets. I want to believe that there are market-based solutions for a lot of things, but part of me keeps getting pulled towards when we see the policy that academics come up with that seems to be more effective. A lot of it doesn't involve the free market. Um, where do you see the free market's role in solving things like climate change and other issues that we're facing in our modern time, or do you really think that the solving of those problems lands mostly with the government?
Well, I think it's both. Like I've always been somebody who, and can say this as somebody who was an entrepreneur, a small business owner, somebody who loves farmers markets and things like that. I think there is a role for the market. There's no doubt about it. Where I start getting nervous is when you have market capture or you have oligarchic or oligopolies or monopolistic tendencies, and then markets fail to work because you don't have the competition of the market. And so I think government has a critical role to play in regulating, stabilizing markets. And I also think government has an important role to play to address market failures. And climate is probably one of the biggest market failures that exists in our society right now. And it's going to be pretty hard to have a market if we don't have a livable planet.
And so that's kind of where I'm leading towards in this line of questioning is And part of why I kind of said that I was explaining the story of that video game series was
Mm,
because it seems as though the tech bros of the world really are leaning on, and I've seen many climate scientists now say that we're kind of stuck with this as a solution, that we might have to look at injecting aerosols into the atmosphere.
yeah.
Um, it, is that something that, if it comes to it, if we have to do it, you understand why, or like it goes beyond a last resort, and it's not even thinkable?
I think some of that depends because there's so many unintended consequences of different interventions in our ecosystems that we don't even understand. And so I think what's infuriating about even having this conversation is that we have solutions right now that can address
We
the
shouldn't
climate
have to have the
crisis.
conversation. Exactly.
So we
Yeah,
shouldn't
yeah.
even have to have this conversation. Like literally, I thought once wind and solar power, once renewable energy became the lowest cost sources of energy product generation, that we wouldn't even be having this conversation anymore. But it just shows you how powerful the oil and gas sector is, how powerful fossil fuel industries are, and the only counterbalancing power that I can see to address that is governments. But unfortunately, a lot of our governments have, oil and gas regulatory capture too, right? And so that creates market distortions that doesn't even allow the market to work properly. So one of the things I've been saying to the Ford government, for example, is when we look at new electricity generation, why not just do a competitive public procurement process and select the lowest cost emission free electricity? If we did that, wind and solar would win the day.
Like, why
But
not? Why not
unfortunately,
do lowest costs? Like if
yeah,
he's all about making sure budgets are small and being effective in government, should we not be doing the lowest cost thing? That's what a good business would do.
you would think that we would want to go with it, but instead, this government's ramping up expensive fossil gas plants, and you kind of have to ask yourself, well, why is that? Why aren't they going with the lowest cost solution, which would be wind, solar, and storage?
One thing that I find interesting when I talk to people who understand the Green Party of Ontario's policies or otherwise find them interesting is that you seem to be a party that attracts a lot of policy wonks, more so than the federal
Yes.
Green Party. Like the federal Green, like you would think that you guys in the federal Greens align, but I personally don't have much love for the federal Green Party compared to the Ontario Greens, where I can see the work that's being done, and as somebody who really takes to heart like good policy and understanding that like we need to listen to experts and we need to implement policy that might not be popular, but will result in what's best for the most amount of people. Like a great example of unpopular policy that's the best for most amount of people is congestion pricing. We're seeing it in New York, where like
Yep.
it's good. Maybe even in Toronto, we should be implementing some type. And what we see in Europe and in places where it's implemented is that it's not popular at first, but then people freaking love it. You even had guys from Barstool Sports, like
Yep.
super right wing, pro Trump, pro MAGA, being like, we want to keep congestion pricing because it's made New York a better city, and it's only been a few weeks. So
Exactly.
when I look at the Green Party, and when I think about how I don't see you guys necessarily as a left wing party. I see you guys as a pragmatic policy party. Do you define the Greens as being left wing? Like, how would you politically align your compass?
It's interesting. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day. So I would say we're definitely a progressive party. A lot of the outcomes we want are outcomes that you would associate with a progressive party, but sometimes our methods to get to that progressive outcome, some people might consider to be conservative in some cases. And it comes back to the point you just made. We're really about evidence based, pragmatic, best practices policy, and to get to the outcomes that we want. And so, I would say a lot of our outcomes addressing climate crisis, um, addressing income inequality. I mean, income inequality is at the highest level it's been in 100 years right now. We have to address that. Um, Making sure that we have good social justice policies in place, making sure we have vibrant, livable downtowns and communities, a vibrant healthcare system, high quality education. Those are all things that I think most people associate with center left or left parties. Um, and we support all of that. But sometimes we'll take a policy approach that may not be reflexively left wing, if that makes sense. But from my perspective, if you get the same outcome and you can bring more people along to achieve that outcome, then kind of, unless I don't want to say who cares, because you certainly want to make sure the ends doesn't justify the means. So you want to make sure to get to that end, you're going to minimize harm, you're going to maximize benefits for people, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't want to be ideologically predisposed of how we get to the outcome, as long as we get to the outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it almost feels as though, like, as much as you are the Green Party, for people who have this mental barrier as like, I'm not an environmentalist. Well, are you pragmatic, or are you evidence based? Because that seems to me to be the core ideology of the party. Um, I don't know if you feel the same way, but like that's why I think a lot of the people who I know who are policy wonks are far more invested in the policies proposed by the Green Party of Ontario as opposed to the federal wing, simply because it seems like it's more about the pragmatic aspect and not just about we're the Green Party, we're the environmentalists. It's like, no, like some of this stuff isn't even about the environment. It's just like good policy. So the one question I did want to ask you before we head out, um, and I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything. It's just because this is a lot of the policy wonks have been like, I've seen people talking about this on podcasts and on Reddit, and I feel like I know the answer, and I think it's because you wanted to broaden your base. But why did you guys remove the uh, your previous policy statement on the Catholic school boards in Ontario? Why was that removed from your current platform?
Yeah, part of that is because our education system's been through so much disruption, especially coming out of the pandemic, that to add more disruption to kids' lives right now, I don't think it's the way to go. I don't think it's the right time for it. And on top of that, the Ford government has cut $1,500 per student from our education system, which is about a $3 billion cut to public education in Ontario. um, our schools need investment right now. Our schools need stability right now. And I think we need to unify everybody in public education, whether it's Catholic or the public system, to just advocate for proper funding of public education in this province. So I just don't think it's the right time for it.
As a teacher, I got to agree. Class sizes are out of control. Funding needs to be addressed. But I really do appreciate everything that you've had to say. I think we've had a pretty honest conversation, and I think that we kind of went into some places that I think are going to be interesting for a lot of people. I really hope that maybe nothing that you gained from it, but I hope that you see that there are people out there that maybe aren't Green Party diehards, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of people with a lot of love for the Green Party, and hopefully one day in the future with PR or MMP, we can see that love being spread a bit more.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Frank. And I'm a big fan of PR and MMP as well. So we share that.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you have a good one. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
Thank you.